Well, hello, everybody, again. This is your speaker today, Dr. Ronald Brown, here in New York City, in the borough of Queens, where I live, right halfway between Forest Hills and Jackson Heights. Those of you who know New York know that this is one of the most diverse neighborhoods on the face of the earth. In fact, Queens claims to have more different religions, ethnic races, groups of people than any other place in the world. So it's a good place to be discussing world religions. Well, our topic for today is Hinduism, religion and civilization. Not far from where I live is Flushing, Queens, where there's a giant Hindu temple devoted to the god Ganesha. There's another one not too far here in Jackson Heights. In fact, there's an entire street in Jackson Heights where it is filled with Indian grocery stores, clothing stores, jewelry stores, travel agencies, immigration lawyers, temples, all kinds of different parts of the Hindu religious infrastructure. Now, the theme today is not just Hinduism, but it is Hinduism as a religion and as a civilization, which means that it is more than what you do Sunday morning in church. It is an aspect of your daily life. With Hinduism, it determines what you eat, what you cannot eat, what clothes you wear, when you worship, what language you worship in. And in fact, where you live near your local Hindu temple. So Hinduism is a religion, what you believe in your mind, relationship with God or gods or that, and a religious worship once in a while. But it is also a civilization, determines how you do business, your marriage, raising children, attitudes toward politics. Politics is very much a part of a civilization. So for those Americans who are used to separating religion and politics into nice little categories, well, most of the world's religions do not have separation of church and state. They do not have this barrier, this wall, as Thomas Jefferson described it, the wall separating religion and this world, religion and politics. In Hinduism, they are merged into one entity, which we will see today entirely dominates the life of the Indian subcontinent. So once again, as you can see, I am a professor. I teach at Touro College and the Unification Theological Seminary here in New York, where I teach all kinds of classes on religion and politics, history, political science, international relations, you name it. And so, of course, I give an outline. Now, if you were my student at Touro or at the Unification Theological Seminary, you would be taking notes of every precious word I say. You'd be sending me this evening a 700-word essay summarizing it. And your essay is going to be based on the 6 topics, the 6 themes we are going to discuss today. First one is civilizations of the ancient world. Hinduism grew up in a world of competing and warring global civilizations. The origins of Hinduism, the theory of the Aryan invasion, the Indian theory of Hinduism, which is very different from the Western perception of Hinduism. Number 4, a world of gods and goddesses and spirits and deities. Just an absolute universe of sacred beings. 5, the many forms of worship. I mean, it's not just going to church on Sunday morning, sitting there listening to the preacher or the priest doing his magic, and then going home. You can worship your chosen god or goddess in a variety of ways, whichever is appropriate to you. and looking into the future. Because don't forget, this series is not just on the history of religion and the present circumstances, but where is Hinduism going into the future? As I speak, we are in the last days of 2020, ready to embark on 2021, well into the 21st century and well into the third millennium. So we have to look into the future. Where is the world going? So let's begin our exploration of Hinduism. The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order by Samuel P. Huntington is a book that strongly influenced me because it basically argues that the world as we know it today is divided into various civilizations. You see the dark blue area, which is Western Europe, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, which are part of the Catholic Protestant civilization, not religion, but civilization. Russia and parts of Central Asia, Belarus, Ukraine, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania are part of the Orthodox, Christian Orthodox civilization. Most of China is a Confucianist civilization, along with Korea and Vietnam. You have the Hindu civilization, which we see on the map as I guess that's a pink color or a yellowish color. The Islamic civilization going from Morocco the whole way across to Indonesia and Malaysia and the southern Philippines. Then you have the Buddhic civilization, which is Mongolia, Tibet, and the countries of South Asia from Burma, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. Now, Samuel P. Huntington is a bit unsure what to do with South America, what to do with Black Africa, or the bottom half of Africa. The northern half of Africa is definitely in the Islamic civilization sphere, but he's not quite sure what to do with the rest of Africa. But these are civilizations. Now, a civilization is a universal building block of religion. Every religion claims to be universally valid, not just a religion of some little tribe or something. And as I'm speaking in 2020, we're seeing more and more local religions starting to aspire to be a civilization. Mormons. There are now more Mormons scattered around the world than there are in the United States. Voodoo is emerging from Haiti and New Orleans, and now there are voodoo temples in Brooklyn and Paris and Shanghai. So civilizations, according to Samuel P. Huntington, are increasingly shaping our world. And so civilizations is a universal building block of religion, along with music, architecture, sacred language, sacred books, hierarchy, food, the way you dress. These are all part of a civilization. If you are a Muslim woman, you are veiled to some degree. If you are a Jewish man, Orthodox, you have a black hat of some kind, strings on your t-shirt, and the food is clearly regulated, what you're allowed to eat and what you are not allowed to eat. So these are all elements of a civilization. Religion is what you do Sunday morning, but a civilization is the way you live your daily life. Now, Christianity tried desperately to turn the teachings of Jesus into a simple religion, meaning separation of church and state, separation of religion and politics. Jesus did not intend Christianity to become a civilization. It was preparing for the end of days. Now, when you compare Islam with early Christianity, the teachings of Jesus, you see this stark contrast. In Islam, there is no separation of church and state, religion and politics. The Prophet Muhammad was a religious leader who received revelations from God through the angel Gabriel and wrote them down in the form of the Quran. And Islam, the Sharia, regulates what you can eat, how you should wear, how you should bathe, how you should do business, how you should live every aspect of your daily life. No separation between religion, politics, and daily life. Christianity, as espoused and taught by Jesus, was the exact opposite. In Matthew, we read, "Render to Caesar that but belongs to Caesar, and to God the things that are God's." Jesus said, "My kingdom that I'm talking about is not in this world. If it were, my servants would prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." So Jesus did not tell his early Christians how to dress, what to eat, where to live, how to do business, how to get married. In fact, Jesus was anti-marriage, saying, "Leave your husband and wife and come follow me." And the Beatitudes are the perfect example of this otherworldly teaching of Jesus. So Jesus, like the Buddha, tried to separate religion and politics, this world from the other world. But the Christians, like the Buddhists, eventually realized that religion and politics, the otherworldly and this worldly, are so interconnected, so bound together with a universal iron law, that Christianity also became a religion of this world. Now, it was Emperor Constantine in the year 312 who was fighting to seize the role of Roman emperor, who was clearly not on the winning side. But legend or truth, who knows? He claims that he had a dream, and in this dream he saw a vision of angels carrying a cross, the Christian cross. Now remember, Constantine was a pagan. The Roman Empire was persecuting Christians. But Constantine had this vision, and it was written in Latin, "In this sign you will conquer." Meaning, if you put this cross on the shields and on the uniforms of your soldiers, you will win the war. Well, the great Battle of Malvern Bridge in Italy was a victory for Constantine. There you see me standing at the Malvern Bridge in Italy a number of years ago, one of the places of religious history where the teachings of Jesus were abandoned, and the kingdom of Jesus became part of this world. And Christianity probably would have died out or remained a minor sect if it hadn't been seized by Constantine, made into the official religion of the Roman Empire. He built his new capital city, Constantinople, became the second Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and the teachings of Jesus were rejected, and Jesus's kingdom became of this world. So basically, you can say that Constantine was just following the rules of civilizations going back millions of years. Church and state are bound together. They cannot be separated. And even if Jesus, or as we're going to see later on, the Buddha, tried to separate religion from politics and government, the law of nature made it impossible. And Christianity became a civilization just like Hinduism, just like the Russian Orthodoxy in Russia, and the separation of church and state was forgotten. Well, let's begin with our discussion of Hinduism by looking at some of these great civilizations which for millennia had bound together church and state, religion and politics. We see in the Mediterranean the Greek civilization, one of the oldest, where we all know about the Greek and Roman gods and goddesses, which were inseparable from the politics. The Roman emperors believed and were taught their people that when they died, they entered heaven and became gods. So you can't separate the Greek and the Roman empires from religion. Religion was part and parcel of the empire. Other ancient religions, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Babylonian. We all know about the Tower of Babylon. We know the stories of the Great Flood and everything. Mythology, religion was bound up with the empire. The emperor was chosen by God, crowned by religious leaders, and as in the story of King David in Jerusalem, only the king of Israel was allowed to go into the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem, along with the priests. So the kings had almost a divine status. In Egypt, gods and goddesses all over, pyramids built to guarantee the afterlife of the pharaohs. Up in China, the Yellow River Shang dynasty, Confucianism was the foundation of the Chinese state. Now, this continued for centuries. In Africa, you had the civilization of Mali, with the great capital city of Timbuktu and Mansa Musa, a heavily Islamic civilization in the heart of Black Africa. Aksum and Meroe, the Ethiopian civilizations, once again, religious-based civilizations. Well, today we are talking about one of the oldest civilizations, that is the Indus Valley Ganges civilization going back to 3000 BC, contemporary with the ancient Egyptians and the Babylonian civilizations. So that is going to be our topic. Now, the Indus Valley civilization is considered one of the high civilizations of the ancient world. Temples and palaces built of stone, reading and writing, literature, armies, highly sophisticated societies, temples with priests. These were one of the ancient great civilizations which still continue to dominate India and its surrounding areas. Hinduism began in what is called the Indus Valley civilization, going back to 3000 BC, before Christ, before the Common Era, along the Indus River Valley, which is today modern Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, with chunks of southern Persia, southern Iran included. These were river-based civilizations. The Indus River came down from the mountains, the Himalaya mountains, bringing silt and fertilized and watered the fields and the cities of the Indus Valley civilization. Now, we don't know much about them because their writing, which is only very limited, that continues to exist, has not yet been translated. We don't know how to read it. But we do know that they had giant cities with hundreds of thousands of people, temples, and we do know that they had an elaborate system of what looks like bathing pools or baptismal pools or something, where we believe that there was some type of religious association. So, of course, in the Indus Valley civilization, water was essential because that area until today is very dry and desert, and it's only the river, like the Nile, that rises and floods and brings fertile soil and waters the fields. So, in the Indus Valley, the god of water was the most important deity. Now, this is an example of what we have of the ancient Indus Valley civilizations. We see already back in the Harappan civilization, the cow was a sacred animal. Now, a cow was important because unlike other animals, like a chicken, well, maybe you get eggs from a chicken, but with a cow, you get a steady supply of milk, which was very important. And so the sacred cow was a sacred animal. We see writing, these types of symbols that we see above the pictures of the cow, which we cannot yet translate. We don't know whether they're what they mean, but hopefully sometime we will be able to translate them, transcribe them, and find out what they're talking about. On the right at the bottom, we see one of the sculptures. We see a man very similar to what you'd expect to find in Babylon and the Persian Gulf, probably a king, bearded, wearing some type of crown. And until today, the cow remains a sacred animal in India. They roam the streets. When I was there a couple of years ago, I mean, a cow would lay down in the middle of a busy intersection. Well, you didn't make that cow move. The mountain in the north of India, Mount Kailash, see it up in the Himalayas, is the source of the Indus Valley River. And up in the Himalayas, it's not just the Indus Valley River, but the Ganges River that flow down from almost the same area, Mount Kailash. And this was believed by the Indus Valley civilization and by Hindus until today, and even many Buddhists believe Mount Kailash is a sacred mountain. Now, those of you who've been following the series know that sacred mountains are a universal building block of religion. Where did Moses go to get the 10 Commandments? Not into a cave, up into the mountain. Jesus was crucified on Mount Golgotha outside Jerusalem. So mountains are important. When you build a St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue, it is a mountain of stone pointing upward. Hindu temples are mountains, recreations of Mount Kailash. So mountains are a sacred, universal building block of religion. So if you're going to found a new religion and declare yourself a god, you better get a sacred mountain, because world religions all need a good mountain. Well, Mount Kailash is the abode of Shiva, who's considered the god of meditation, the destroyer of the world, the creator of the world. And here we see a central view of Mount Kailash. Very impressive type of mountain that it looks like it would be almost impossible to climb. Now, in the Indus Valley civilization, we do know that there were lots of different gods and goddesses, which is true for all ancient civilizations. If you live beside a great river, they can either bring fertilizer and water for your field, or it can flood you out of existence. You are going to treat that river with respect, even building temples and offering sacrifices to make the god of the river or the goddess of the river bring only good things. And so thousands of gods and goddesses coexisted. If you were a woman and wanted a husband, you prayed to one god. If you were a woman and you couldn't get pregnant, you prayed to another goddess. If you were a woman and you wanted to stop getting pregnant, well, you went to another goddess who would stop you from having a new baby every 9 months. If you were a soldier, you worshiped the god of warfare. If you were a farmer, you worshiped the goddess of fertility. If you were a carpenter, you worshiped the god who had fashioned the universe, raised Mount Kailash as another artistic creator. So thousands of gods existed in the ancient world, and especially in the Indus Valley civilization. Now, where did the Indus Valley people go? Well, around 5,600, there was a rise of a group of people in what is today Russia, southern Russia, the Ukraine, called the Aryans, or sometimes called the Indo-Europeans. Indo as in India, and Europeans as in Europe. And gradually over the centuries, for some reason, people began to migrate from this ancient homeland. Now, we don't know. Could have been a drought, could have been warfare, could have been civil wars. Who knows? Maybe it was just an increase in population and the land was not able to support all these new people being born. So over the centuries, groups of people would migrate. Some went west to Europe, where they became known as Slavs, like the Russians and the Bulgarians. Others became Germans, others became Celts in France, Iberians in Spain, up into Scandinavia, where they became known as Vikings and other people. Some went east, crossing over what is today Russia, and entered into northern China or northern Japan, where they became known as the Ainu people. Others migrated south, and they migrated into the ancient Babylonian Empire, down into ancient Egypt, and further east into what is today Iran, and eventually reaching into India. Well, these people were nomads. And here we see them arriving in India approximately 1750 BC, before the Common Era, conquering the Indus Valley civilization and spreading across northern India. They were nomads, which meant the horse, which they had domesticated, was their means of transportation. They had cattle and sheep, and they migrated wherever they could find grass for their animals, wherever they could find a place to winter and then pick up in the spring and once again move on. Now, the Indo-Europeans, the Aryan people, had their own language group, which means why almost all the languages of Europe, from Spanish, Italian, Greek, Latin, German, Russian, are all of the same language family. And those who migrated east down into Iran, Afghanistan, and northern India also speak a branch of the Indo-European language. And here we see the spreading of the Indo-European languages. On the left, we see Indo-Iranian going down to Hindi, Bengali, Gujarati, into Iran, Farsi, Kurdish, Persian. Greek was there, Celtic, people of Ireland and Scotland and the Welsh spoke a branch of the language. Italic branched out into French and Spanish and Portuguese, Italian and Romanian. Another group became Russian, Polish, Serbo-Croatian, Bulgarian, and still another group became the Germanic, which is today Swedish, Icelandic, Norwegian, English, and Middle High German, Yiddish, Dutch. And so all these languages are from the same root. Now, that doesn't mean that if I, an English speaker, go to India, I'll be able to speak Gujarati. But as you study languages, you find they are related. They have similarities. Certain words are the same or very similar, especially words for the horse, which they had when they left, words for snow, words for family units, mother, father, uncle, aunt. These words are related. Well, of course, when they entered India, they picked up words from the Indus Valley civilization, which they added, but until today, most of the languages of India, except for the Dravidian in the south, are all Indo-European languages. Now, the Indo-Europeans coming from southern Russia looked more like the people in the picture on the left. Light skin, very European features. The people of the Indus Valley, on the other hand, the ancient people of India, were the dark-skinned people, very curly hair and a completely different racial stock. Their languages, Dravidian, today predominantly Tamil in the south, are not at all related to the Indo-European family. The people are ethnically, racially different from the invading Indo-Europeans. Well, the Aryans brought with them another aspect of culture, not just the language, and the horse, of course, but they also brought their number one god, who, like most ancient people, were a warlike people. If you're a nomad, you're constantly defending your lands, defending a tribe from stealing your goats or your sheep or your cows or your women or your children for slaves. So every ancient civilization had a god of war, which was associated with thunder, the giving of laws, order, and justice. On the left, we see Indra, the god of war, riding on an elephant with his swords. In the middle, we see Thor, the Germanic Viking god. That's who we named Thursday, after the god of war among the German peoples. On the right, we see Zeus, the god of war of the Greeks and later the Romans. Jehovah is the name of the ancient Hebrew god of war. And so all of these ancient peoples had a god of war, a god of victory. And so Indra was the god who provided victory for the Aryans over the Indus Valley civilization. And so Indra always had a high place in the pantheon of the ancient Indian and current gods and goddesses. Well, the Aryans brought not only the horse, not only the cow, and not only warfare and their language with them, but they also brought legends and stories, which gradually, between the 5th and the 2nd century BCE, were written down. Now, at the bottom and on the right, we see examples of what we call the Sanskrit alphabet. It is a phonetic alphabet. It's not a picture alphabet, hieroglyphs like in Chinese or ancient Egyptian. Gradually, their ancient stories were written down, compiled in books which we call the Bhagavad Gita, or simply called the Gita, which is the sacred book of the Hindus. going back to the stories of ancient princes, Arjuna, and wars, philosophical discussions, the duties of the king and of other people, collection of ancient books, similar very much to the Jewish Bible, which is a collection of stories, some of them borrowed from the ancient Babylonians, such as the Garden of Eden, the Tower of Babel, Adam and Eve, the Great Flood were ancient Babylonian legends that the Hebrew Bible accepted and edited, of course, and then added on their own stories of Abraham and Jacob and Isaac, King David, constantly adding on more books. So the Gita is a collection of stories, tales, poetry, ancient writings, which has assumed the status of a sacred book. Once again, sacred books, a universal building block of all religions. The Holy Book of the Mormons, the Book of Mormon, the sacred book of the Christians, the New Testament, sacred book of the Muslims, the Quran. So every religion has a sacred book, and this was written in classical Sanskrit, which points up another universal building block of religions, is the role of sacred languages. Even after Hebrew had died out as a spoken language by the time of Christ, the rabbis still preserved the ancient language, translating it into the language of the people. Prayer in the Orthodox synagogue was in Hebrew. Whether you were English speaking or Chinese speaking, you still had to pray in the sacred language. Muslims until today required to pray in Arabic, even if you don't understand a word of what you are saying. In Hinduism, it is the Sanskrit sacred language. So sacred languages, as well as sacred books, are two very powerful universal building blocks of all religions. More books were written. We have the Rig Veda, and these were hymns to be recited by a cantor, by a reciter in the temples. Another, the Yajurveda, formulas to be recited by the priest. So we know that in the ancient Hindu temples, there was a person who was reciting prayers off to the side, like the cantor, and then you had the priest who was performing the religious service. And then there was a Samaveda, formulas to be sung by the chanter, still another person. So the Hindu temple is constantly filled with different people reciting different books. And then there was the Atharvaveda, a collection of spells and incantations, charms and hymns, a book of magic rituals, you might say. And so this literature grew up between 1500 and 500 BCE, and like the Jewish Bible, constantly adding new books, new collections over the centuries. Well, Hinduism grew, took root, flourished. The Aryans conquered more and more of India, pushing the native inhabitants down further and further into the south, where they remain today. But they also eventually adopted this mixture of religions, the Indus Valley religion with the Aryan religion, which came to be known as Hinduism. And with a great literature, the writing, the rituals, the ceremonies, flourished into a great empire and a great culture, which influenced not just India and Afghanistan, but whole way down through Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, down into Indonesia and Malaysia. And wherever this Majapahit empire spread and Hindu missionaries went, of course, they built their temples. And here we see one of the great temples that is built in Java, in Indonesia, far away from India. Once again, it is a recreation of the sacred mountain Kailash back up in the Himalayas. In fact, I was recently in Thailand, and the king Rama had just died, and it is believed that when he died, his soul was taken back to Mount Kailash in northern India, and he would live among the Hindu deities. So even though he was a Buddhist, and Thailand is today a Buddhist country, the influence of Hinduism still remains very, very strong. And I visited the famous temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, very similar to the temples in Java, testifying to the global influence of Hinduism. Indonesia, Malaysia, up into the Philippines, where the culture flourished. Now, the reality of the situation is that as the Aryans invaded, they did not exterminate the native inhabitants. They gradually absorbed them into this growing civilization, which we call Hindu civilization. Each state very often kept its own king, adopted Hinduism in its own way, adopted one or the other of the Hindu gods or goddesses. The people remained as distinct as they wanted to. In the South, they continued to speak their Tamil language. In the North, they would accept Aryan language, but they would adapt it, and it gradually became a completely separate language, but still linked to their Indo-European roots. The map on the left shows some of the major states, each one with its own individual culture. So the Aryans, when they came in, were a relatively tolerant people, absorbing new gods and goddesses into the ever-growing pantheon of gods, allowing the people to keep their own language, develop their own language. So it was a relatively tolerant occupation of the Indian subcontinent. Until today, if you look at the map on the right, we see that the entire north, except for the very far north where you have Tibetan Burman languages, which are related to Chinese, the big yellow area and the yellowish area is the extent of the Indo-European languages. In the south, we have the Dravidian languages, which is Tamil, and other ones. And they are the ancient languages of India, which have survived. Now, Hinduism is a rather unique example of one people conquering another. Now, Hinduism is, of course, very tolerant of peoples, of languages, and of cultures. But if you ask somebody, are you a Hindu? They might look at you as a bit odd, saying, what does that mean? Because people would identify themselves as a person who worships predominantly the god Shiva. And so we would say, what's your religion? He would say, I'm a member of Shaivanism. Or Vaishnava would be a Vaishnavism. Or among the other many traditions is how people would identify themselves. The word Hindu was invented by the British to link all of these diverse religions, which had a common shared books, the Gita, common traditions. A wide spectrum of laws and prescriptions for daily morality existed. Every tribe, every group, every culture, had its own laws regarding marriage and divorce and children. Hinduism absorbed a variety of intellectual and philosophical points of view. So a Hindu would never say, this is what I believe and everyone should believe it. They would say, this is what I believe and this is the God I worship. What do you believe and which God do you worship? Hinduism, unlike Judaism or Christianity or Islam or Buddhism, does not have a single founder. There was no great person. Who wrote the books of the Gita? We don't know and we don't care. It is an ongoing, constantly growing tradition and teaching. And Hinduism claims to be the oldest living religion, tracing its roots back to the ancient Aryans and the Indus Valley civilization, constantly growing, never having died out, gone through periods of constant reform and growth. Now, Hinduism is, as I mentioned very early on, is not just a religion. Religion is a rather Western approach to beliefs. Just as I mentioned early, Christ tried to separate church and state, religion and politics, saying, I am not after worldly power. My kingdom is not of this world. Well, as we saw with Constantine, that basic teaching of Jesus was erased, and we had the rise of a Christian civilization in Europe. And like Judaism, Islam, like Confucianism, Hinduism is a civilization. People are arranged according to caste. The Brahmins are the priestly class. You have the Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers. You have the Vaishyas, traders, merchants, Sudras, unskilled workers. And at the bottom, you had the so-called untouchables. You knew your place in society. It was rigid. Each group had its own gods, worshipped in its own temples, had its own way of dress, and had its own job. So Hinduism prescribed not just beliefs in a god and heaven or hell and all that kind of stuff, but it was a civilization. You were born into your caste and you could not escape it. Hinduism told you what food to eat, what food not to eat, like Judaism as kosher, just like Islam has its laws regarding halal. Well, so Hinduism is vegetarian. Certain foods are permitted, certain foods are forbidden. Clothing, the way you decorate your body, the way you dress shows your God that you worship or your caste. Holidays, days of no work, of enjoyment, going to temple, how you worship, how you celebrate. The work. I remember I was in India and I met a guy who was from one of the lower classes, the Sudras, and his job and his family's job for centuries had been to collect the poop that came out of the cow. If cows are roaming around everywhere, they eat vegetable things and they poop. Well, his job was to pick up the poop, put it on a wall to dry in the sun, and to sell it to restaurants and housewives to do their cooking, since wood and coal are very precious. So the cow poop became a major source. Well, his subcaste had a monopoly on that. So the caste determined what job you did in life, how you worship, where you worship, what your education is, how much education you get. This is all part of a civilization. It is not just what you do Sunday morning in church. but it determines every aspect of your daily life. Now, as the Aryans expanded into the Indus Valley and into other parts of India, even down into Southeast Asia, they had no problems absorbing new gods and goddesses and traditions and languages and cultures into this growing empire. The three most important gods are Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma is the person who creates the universe. Vishnu keeps it alive, preserves it. Shiva destroys it so that it can go back to Brahma, where a new world is created. So gods have a definite function in the society. The three, but in addition to the three, there are hundreds of thousands of more gods. Now, Huston Smith, the author of The World's Religions, one of the great authorities of world religions, argued that God has made different religions to suit different aspirations, times, and countries. All doctrines are only so many paths. One can reach God if one follows any of the paths with wholehearted devotion. Now, unlike Western Christians, Judaism, who firmly believes there's only one God, and this is the God that everybody should worship, and all other gods are probably just disguised devils. Islam, the same thing. There is but one God, and he revealed the only true path. These are the two major monotheistic religions. There's only one God, and God has taught us how to live, and all other religions are wrong. Christianity sort of deviates. It's semi-monotheistic because it teaches that there are somehow three gods, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost, sort of superglued into one God. So Christians and Muslims don't consider Christians as monotheistic people, but as having three gods. But Christians would insist, no, we really only have one God, but three manifestations of this God or something. Whereas Huston Smith said, none of these are absolutely right. Every religion reflects the aspirations, the times, and the people that gave rise to them. Meaning, if you lived in India, there were hundreds of languages, hundreds of cultures, well, there would be hundreds of different gods reflecting the diversity of the country and of the times. And so Huston Smith said Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Lutherans, Buddhists, these are all just paths leading to the same God. Now, a lot of people would disagree with this, but it explains very much the Hindu approach to religion. They're not telling you you are right or you are wrong, or this is the only God and all other ones are wrong. They're saying, choose the God who reflects your aspirations, your age group. A man of 90 years old would have a different relationship to the gods than a teenager. A kid in college working towards a doctorate would have a very different relationship to the gods than would the boy I know who picked up the cow poop and collected it to sell it to housewives. A woman wanting to get married and have children would adopt and venerate a goddess who would reflect her aspirations. An old woman approaching the end of her life with her grandchildren around her would have a very different relationship to the gods. Central to all of the teachings of Hinduism is Ahimsa, which is pacifism, meaning don't kill. This was very much put forward by Gandhi. It is non-violence, meaning when the British occupied India, don't rise in revolt and start slaughtering the Indians, but use non-violent resistance. And this is still taught by the Dalai Lama. Don't resist the Chinese occupation of Tibet. Peaceful resistance. Very strongly influenced Martin Luther King, saying, don't throw stones and bombs and shoot the white oppressors, but use peaceful resistance, non-violent resistance. Now, this again is uniquely Hindu. It reflects this diversity, this tolerance of other gods, of new gods, of old gods, of different peoples. Now, it reflects it's very different from what you find in most monotheistic religions. When you read the Jewish Bible, the Jews claimed the land of Canaan as their homeland. They went in under Joshua, they took over Jericho, exterminated the entire population. Jewish Bible is filled with genocides and wars. King David, who we all love so much, well, when he conquered Jerusalem from the Jebusites, he exterminated all the males and sold off the children into slavery. What did the Spanish do when they took over Latin America? Destroyed the temples and the priests and the civilizations of the Incas and the Aztecs. What did the Americans do to the Native Americans? Exterminate them, force them to become Christians, even rounding up children, putting them in boarding schools to destroy their language, destroy their religion, destroy their culture. So the Hinduism was marked by a peaceful conquest of the Indian peninsula, by the absorption of new religions. It's not at all rare to go into a Hindu temple and find a statue or a picture of Jewish Bible, Jehovah, or Jesus, or the Buddha, or any other holy figure. They're all paths leading to the same end. Now, what distinguishes Hinduism is precisely this unbelievable world of gods and goddesses. Now, with Hinduism, like I mentioned, if you are a young girl wanting to get a husband and some children, you would worship a goddess who would help you accomplish that. When you go to the Ganesha temple, which you can see in the picture on the right in Flushing, Queens, what is really striking is there is no focused worship. Every corner and all around the place, there is a different statue or painting or shrine. You choose the one that reflects your aspirations. If you were a student preparing for exams, you would pray to one particular deity who is a deity of intellectual pursuits. Now, the temple itself is devoted to Ganesha, the elephant god. Well, Ganesha is the god that is Lord of new beginnings and overcoming obstacles. Now think, if you were a new immigrant coming to New York and you came from a modest or even low-class family in India, when you got to the United States or got to Queens, your first job was to find a job, learn enough English to survive, get your kids in school, get them new shoes and clothes so that they'll look decent in school, provide money for the next baby that's on its way. So what better God to pray to than the God of beginnings and overcoming obstacles, the ideal faith for a new immigrant. Now, if you were a multi-billionaire, you might not pray to Ganesha, but then again, if you were on the verge of purchasing an entire chain of supermarkets and you were trying to raise the money by in any way you could to buy the chain and to grow your business, well, you would go to Ganesha and try to elicit his help to overcome the obstacles you were going to no doubt encounter. Well, I spent January in 1998 and again in 2019 traveling around India, visiting temples, meeting people from Goa up to Mumbai and Pune in 2019, in 1998 from New Delhi down to Gaya and Bodh Gaya, the sacred cities of the Buddha, with a nice long vacation in Lucknow in the north. Well, I could go back 100 times and spend another 100 Januaries and still never seen but a small part of India. Well, the issue of Ganesha fascinated me because you'd find Ganesha in every temple. And I found on one of my trips this poster showing the various symbols of Ganesha. Large ears, a good listener. Carries an axe to cut off all bonds of attachment to unnecessary things. Elephant has a small mouth, meaning talk less and listen more. Every aspect of this statue, which we so often just look at and we don't really appreciate the meaning of it, really comes alive. Now, a statue in Hinduism is like a theology book because it is theology in art and stone and sculpture. Very similar to a Catholic cathedral. Go to St. Patrick's. Everywhere there is a saint, and the saint has something in his hand or her hand, which tells what this saint does, who the saint is. Pictures on the wall, paintings, stained glass windows. St. Patrick's Cathedral is theology in architecture. Well, in Hinduism, statues are theology in statues. Now, every area has its own distinct god. For example, if you look at the area of Gujarat, which is part of the ancient Indus Valley civilization. Well, for you living there on a delta of the mighty Indus Valley River flowing down out of the Himalayas, well, as I said earlier, it can bring a flood, it can bring fertilizer for your fields, it can bring a bumper crop, or it can bring destruction. And so water is considered sacred, and Prajapati is the goddess of water. Water is a sacred element of every meal. Before and after a meal, you're expected to pour water in the palms of your right hand and sip the water 3 times. Now, once again, water is a universal building block of all religions, whether it is a mikvah for religious Jews, a bath for religious Jews to purify themselves, whether it is a Muslim washing his feet and hands and face before going into prayer, whether it is the baptism of a child or an adult in the baptismal ritual, whether it is in unificationism, sprinkling water as a blessing on people. Water is a universal building block. Well, Hinduism elevates it to water is a deity to be worshipped in its own right. And if you lived on the banks of a raging river, you definitely respected the power of water and treated it as it were a deity. In the South, they venerate the Lord Ayapan in the Tamil area in the south. Now, these are Dravidian people. They are not Aryans. They are the ancient people of India. And they have a very strong tradition of ascetic celibate meditation in solitude. It is very common for people, especially young men, at a certain age to become curious about the mysteries of life, to leave everything behind and to go off and to live in the jungle or in the forest, because the southern area is very forested and jungle, and to meditate. And so here again, if you are of the solitary type, silent meditation, well, this would be the god who you would venerate and look to for guidance. Manasa, the snake goddess. This is in East India, where the forests and jungles, and especially in the June, July, and August monsoon season, when the rains pour down, flooding Bangladesh, as you can see on the right, the Ganges River and other tributaries flooding the area. Well, of course, in any jungle area, when it's flooded, the snakes are going to come out to avoid drowning. And so during the monsoon season, you say a special prayer and make a sacrifice to Manasa, the snake goddess. If you are bit by a snake, it is believed she will help you. But it is also fertility and prosperity. So here again, we see a goddess for every season, for every temperament. If you go and make an offering to Manasa in the monsoon season, nobody is going to criticize you saying, why are you doing that? You should worship another god. You should worship a different god. There is a high degree of diversity and tolerance. This is a fascinating temple up in the mountains where the snake goddess is venerated. And this you find very often in India. You'll see one temple where it is literally filled with rats as another respect for human life. Famous temple of the goddess Karni Mata. Now, here we see the temple filled with rats because Hindus believe in reincarnation. They believe that when you die, you either move up in the scale of reincarnation or down. If you lived a good life, you will move up. If you lived a bad life, you will move down and require even more levels and more times of reincarnation. So the rat could be your reincarnated brother. An elephant could be your reincarnated father. Who knows what is being reincarnated? Now, the rat, you might say, well, that's sort of a disgusting temple, but still, look at the map. It is in Rajasthan. And in Rajasthan, they worship the rat as almost the national deity. Well, you would wonder why the rat would play important for this area. Well, Rajasthan is the major grain producing area. It's on the Indus Valley. Rivers go down. With good irrigation, you can produce enough wheat to feed the country. Well, the biggest danger to grain is, of course, the rats and mice constantly trying to break into the bags of grain, pick up grain that is lost. So any grain producing area is going to be infested with rats. So rather than exterminate the rat, you try to control them and you raise that rat to the level of a deity. Now, dating back to the Indus Valley civilization, water is of ancient importance. We saw the Indus Valley pools that they used for some type of religious bathing or washing. Well, in an area of monsoon rains, giant rivers, water is going to be essential. And so water is one of the universal building blocks of religion. Now, whether it is a mikvah or washing your feet in a mosque, in India, water assumes major importance. Now, with every world religion, you have the universal building blocks. Now, for a Catholic, water rituals is a baptism and maybe the priest in a Catholic church sprinkling you periodically. But in India, the building block of water is not just a little pebble at the corner of your edifice of world religions, but it is a giant boulder. You have the largest pilgrimage on the earth, and that is the Maya Kumbh Mela in January, where literally millions of people gather to bathe in the sacred Ganges. At Varanasi, or Benares as it was called, people go there to have their bodies burned on the banks of the Ganges, wash away their sins, and to have their ashes thrown into the Ganges River. And so the veneration of water and water rituals is extremely important. Now, there are many forms of worship in Hinduism. Unlike Christians who go to church on Sunday and they do the same thing every Sunday, maybe do a little bit of Bible study during the week, or if you're Catholic, go to another ritual or a procession. Hinduism has a much broader variety of worship, none of which are obligatory, but each person chooses the ritual which is, or the form of worship, which is accommodating. Now, as you can gather, I am a professor. I read, I make Zoom videos and all kinds of stuff. So for me, lecturing, reading, and studying is my form of worship. And you can see in the middle, the Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge and study. And this is what I do. Now, people say, oh, you don't go to church on Sunday? You don't go to confession to the priest? I say, well, no, that's not the way I worship. Well, in Western religions, so-called monotheistic religions, they're very much into this is what you have to do. And if you don't do it, you're going to go to hell. But Hinduism said, no, there's no one formal way that everybody must follow. Choose your own, find your own way. As Huston Smith said, every path leads to the same end. Now, most Christians would practice what we would call bhakti yoga. This is devotion, worship, and rituals to a personal deity. You go to church, you do your ritual, you put your money in the collection, you sing your hymns, you take communion, you pray or light a candle in front of Jesus or whatever. You go to the synagogue, Friday night, Saturday morning, you do the rituals that you're supposed to do. This is, according to most people and according to Hindus, the easiest form of yoga. The only thing you have to do, get up Sunday morning, splash some water on your face, go and sit in church for an hour, and then go home. That is common, ordinary ritual for everybody. Karma yoga, on the other hand, is good works. This would be the social worker. This would be the volunteer who goes around helping poor people, working in a food bank. Now, a lot of people, this is their principal form of activity. Nobody's telling them you have to go to church on Sunday. They say, no, my form of worship is doing good works. Jnana yoga, knowledge and study. Don't have to go and pray and light candles or anything. It is intellectual knowledge. Tantra yoga is a type of divine union, a mystical state through meditation. Hatha yoga, you know that very much. That's what we call yoga when you go to the fitness club, getting into positions which harmonize your body forces and achieve a certain enlightenment. Then there's Gyan Yoga, and that is those who listen to scriptures and follow the teachings of a guru or study the sacred books. Now, in Hinduism, none of these are wrong, none of these are right. You have to choose the one which is your way of worship, and all of these are a form of worship. Bhakti yoga, this is what you see when you go to the temple. This is the priest dressing and undressing and washing and polishing a statue. Now, taking clothes off, laundering the clothes, washing a statue, and putting the clothes back on doesn't really strike most people as being a form of worship. It's something you sort of have to do. It's like vacuuming your apartment. But in Hinduism, this is a form of worship where a person will adopt a particular statue, polish it, caress it, bring flower garlands, burn candles, burn incense in front of a statue. That is a type of worship that almost anybody can do, and many would consider it a perfectly respectable form of worship for a very busy person. Raja Yoga, we see here, and Tantra Yoga, positions, divine union, very focused on the body. In fact, many fitness clubs teach this type of yoga as bringing a certain physical happiness, satisfaction, and tranquility to the body. Hatha yoga, self-control. Jnana yoga, control of the minds. The great books of philosophy, such as the Upanishads, written in 800 to 400 BCE, another phenomenal collection of wisdom. Once again, approaching God through study or through tranquility and control. So Hinduism celebrates the diversity of many kinds of worship. You can see a group of people throwing flowers at a statue. You can see people sitting off in a corner of a Hindu temple in silent meditation. Others studying the ancient books or even studying the ancient language can lead to spiritual enlightenment. Other people meditate in a group. They need the social aspect. All of these are perfectly legitimate. There is no attempt to force someone to do a type of worship that they are not prepared or equipped to handle. Central to Hinduism is, of course, reincarnation. If you are born, or I should say, when you are born, you bring with you your entire past. If you did bad things in previous lives, you would be born with a physical deformity, or even be born as an animal. And you go through this cycle of birth and death called samsara, and hopefully over so many generations, maybe it'll take you thousands of years, when you achieve a certain level of evolution and spirituality, then you will cease to be reborn and you will enter nirvana, or a state where you will no longer have a physical body. You will join with the Godhead. This became extremely important in a branch of Hinduism, which came to be called Buddhism. Nirvana is the state that every person aims at. Overcoming your weaknesses, constantly progressing, doing good, helping people, studying, doing what you can to improve yourself spiritually until at the end of the path on the right, so many reincarnations, you are ready to leave this world and enter total union with the universe. On the left, you see a mandala. This is another type of artwork with profound Hindu and Buddhist implications. These are made on the floor of a temple, and it is made of sand, colored sand. I have seen these being made where monks and lay people will work for years making this intricate pattern of sand on the floor, showing the centerpiece, which is nirvana, and all of the paths. Once it is done, maybe after 5 years of making this, they open the door of the temple and that they let the wind blow it away, to emphasize that nothing in this world is permanent. Everything we do should have a spiritual and not a material goal. Now, let's move into Hinduism today and Hinduism tomorrow. Well, Hinduism really spread worldwide as a philosophical, peaceful movement by Mahatma Gandhi, who resisted the British occupation of India, got its independence without the means of a vicious war. Well, Gandhi and the early independent India believed that India should, on the government level, be secular, granting to the Hindus, the Muslims, the Christians, the Sikhs, the Jains, the Jews, and all the other people who lived in India, giving them total religious freedom. So the model was the United States, separation of church and state, religious freedom for all, no persecution. Gandhi support and the early republic, I should say, reported westernization, spreading of education, modernization, highways, factories, become a modern country. India claims to be the largest democracy in the world with elections, competing political parties, industrialization, building factories and modern inventions, computer centers, and even rockets to the moon and outer space. So early independence from 1948 on, India wanted to be a secular country and preserve this diversity of religions which distinguished India, where all of the people managed to get along pretty well without religious warfare or any type of persecution. The caste system, though, became problematic. Gandhi found that this was an element of Hinduism which was negative, that relegating especially people to the untouchable caste was immoral. And so he wanted to open the caste system so that even if you were my friend who was destined to collect cow poop for the rest of his life, if he was clever, he should go to school, go to university, become a computer programmer, maybe even run for public office. And so the caste system was viewed in modern world as an impediment to social mobility, social improvement. Why should you be relegated to a low caste because of your birth? And it remains a major problem in India today. They've had affirmative action where they would select capable kids from lower castes and guarantee them positions in the university system. And this remains controversial until today. Well, beginning with the rise of the BJP in the early 2000s, a new party entered the political landscape of India. And this was a party that, in many ways, was more inspired by the West and by the monotheistic approach to politics. There is only one way. The BJP, the Indian People's Party, was reacting against centuries of Muslim immigration, Muslim political domination, the arrival of the English taking over India and bringing in Christian missionaries, and decided that they wanted to make India a Hindu country, as it had been in the past, because they found that Christians and Muslims were out to convert people. They believed in one God and only one God. The Hindu gods were compared more to devils than to gods. So the BJP gradually took over the country. And as I speak in 2021, it is the largest political party in India. Anti-Islamic, reducing the Muslims to an inferior state. Anti-Christian, wanting the people to return to what many people say was their original religion before they were kidnapped by Christian missionaries. The Babri Masjid, the big Babri mosque in the north, Hindu radicals occupied it, destroyed it, and said, we will replace it with a Hindu temple, which had been there previously. I was in Goa and Mumbai and visited many churches, and the people were literally terrified, saying that even in the Catholic schools, they were now being required to teach Hinduism. Hindu holidays had to be respected. Hinduism is the national religion of India. Now, this is very much similar to what's going on in other places. You have the persecution of Muslims and Christians in countries like Israel, persecution of Christians in Pakistan, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, where the country must have one religion. And this is where the BJP takes its inspiration. India is a Hindu country. You either become Hindu or you get out. And this is Samuel P. Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. See at the middle, you see Hindu is India and Nepal. Make India great again. Just as in the United States, make America great again, which means get rid of Muslims, get rid of new immigrants, get rid of Jews, get rid of Buddhists, get rid of Hindus, make America Christian again. And this is what Samuel P. Huntington predicts, unfortunately, for the future: a century of religious warfare. And this is the map as Samuel P. Huntington views it. And you can see India, a Hindu majority country. China, Confucianist, the green, the Muslim world reunited under a restored caliph, as is called, demanded by groups like ISIS. Western Europe, the United States, Canada, and Australia ruled by a revitalized Christian religion. The evangelical Christians in under Donald Trump firmly believing in the United States as a Christian republic. Well, India is taking Hinduism seriously. They're building monuments to Bharat Mata, the goddess mother of India. And there in the picture and in the statues, we see the Hindu flag with Mother India riding on her elephant. Shrines to Mother India at the bottom. On the right is a giant map of Hindu India showing the sacred land. Now, for the BJP, India is a sacred land. Once again, we see still another universal building block, the sacred land. The Jews firmly believe that God gave Abraham the land of Canaan, which then Palestine, and today the land of Israel. Americans believe in manifest destiny. God brought the pilgrims across the Atlantic to New England, where they were going to build a city on a hilltop to inspire all of humanity. The Mexicans believe that their chief god led the Aztecs throughout their centuries of wandering through North America, up in the United States, Texas, finally pointing out their sacred land of Mexico City as their promised holy land. God led Brigham Young across the country to Salt Lake City, where he pointed out the sacred land of the Mormons. And so the Hindus have very much believe in the sacredness of the land of India as the land protected by Bharat Mata, or the goddess mother of India. Now, interestingly, if we talk about all the gods and goddesses of India, this is a relatively new goddess who was made by the BJP. Monuments and rituals were invented as the mother goddess of all of India. So in Hinduism, gods come and go. I mean, you have a new demand, a new situation. Well, a god comes out of Mount Kailash or out of the heavens, appears, and becomes a reality. If the Hindus manage to build a base on Mars and start building a Hindu branch on Mars, I'm sure a god is going to appear who will say that this is the new sacred land of Hindus, and that goddess, the mother goddess of Mars, will be worshipped in temples with rituals and become the national god of Hindus on Mars. Now, one of the goals of Hindus in India, as we are speaking, is to make India Hindu again. And we are seeing this across the world, this religious warfare that Samuel P. Huntington predicted. In Europe and America, we have the Muslim ban. Donald Trump imposed a Muslim ban to get rid of them. In France, as I speak, they're trying to domesticate Islam, purge the religion of the elements that they think don't fit in with Christian France. Throughout the Muslim world, Christians and Jews are being persecuted. Christians in Saudi Arabia, in North Africa, Jews expelled from Morocco and Iraq and other countries, finding refuge in Europe or in Israel. In Russia, the Muslim minority in Chechen is being oppressed as Russia turns to Russian Orthodox Christianity as its national religion. As we mentioned in India, Muslim, Christians, and Jains are being persecuted and considered that they should return to their mother religion, which was Hinduism. In Israel, ethnic cleansing in Jerusalem to get rid of the Christians and Muslims, West Bank settlements taking over more and more areas, enclosing the Christians and Muslims in walled compounds like the Gaza Strip, because Israel is a Jewish state and so it should remain. In China, we see the current persecution of Christians and Muslims, the Uyghurs in the western half of China, and Christians throughout. China is a Confucianist country. So the situation is getting complex. Samuel P. Huntington's prediction, his prophecy of wars of religion, are going to be far worse than the Crusades that we had in the past, or the holy wars between Catholics and Protestants. What is happening today in the world are holy wars that armed with drones, armed with atomic bombs, armed with poison gas. And so if this age of holy wars continues, it will be a bloody future, a bloody 21st century for everybody involved. Hindus are expanding. With mass migration, Hindus are not just in India, but they are spreading around the world. We know Hare Krishna of the 1960s, Rajneesh building his religious centers in Oregon. Again, the Ganesha temple in Queens. So on one hand, while the religious war between different religions is taking place, there is a counter trend. As millions of Muslims migrate to Europe, as millions of Chinese migrate around the world, taking with them Buddhism and Confucianism, as Jews build new neighborhoods from New York to San Francisco to Argentina, Jews returning to Germany and Russia, even in Shanghai, a growing Jewish community. So on one hand, we're approaching religious wars, as Samuel P. Huntington argues, but on the other hand, we are having missionaries spreading around the world, and especially migration as a counter trend, saying maybe Queens, New York will not be swept up in this religious warfare. Maybe they will be able to reach some time of accommodation. Probably the biggest and most dangerous threat, challenge facing us in the 21st century. So once again, this is Ron Brown, Dr. Ronald Brown, thanking you for joining me in this exciting lecture. I hope to see you in the future. If you have any issues or comments or questions, feel free to email me at ronbrownmedia@gmail.com. Once again, thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the near future. Bye-bye.